So you have to ask yourself, what would happen if a company like IWC decided to hand a watch over to a design firm or an industrial design firm? Well, in the 1980s, IWC partnered up with Porsche Design and they produced the Ocean 2000. Now this watch I've wanted to talk about for a long time, and these audios allow me to briefly run through ideas and discuss topics. And today we're going to look at this piece in more detail. It is absolutely gorgeous. And the topic of the conversation, the way I worded it was, could this be the most perfectly designed dive watch? Now that's a very open statement and I might change it for the title of this video, but this was the initial thought that went through my mind when I studied this watch for a while, and it was mentioned in a live stream that I discussed a while back. It is fascinating because it's so simple. And when you look at the design of a product, it's all about, especially when it comes to the more heavy-duty industrial design elements, it's about honing down the idea to its root function. Now, it's not always the best thing. You know, reduction is a very important feature that we like to use to make products more streamlined, easier to understand. And there is a fine line you have to cross, because a lot of the times you can over-reduce to a point where you lose the object's function altogether. And I think what Porsche has managed to do here is really hit the nail on the head with regards to not only the watch's form, the way the bracelet integrates with the case, but just the pure simplicity of it. If it wasn't for the tritium luminova on the dial, it would be very hard to place this watch in a certain time period. And I'd say that is one of the best aspects of a good design. It's very difficult to really highlight the time period when it was made. So this watch was developed in and around the 80s, and you can see small touches of that. And I would say the one part that really draws you into that whole mindset is the way the hands have been arranged. Some of the hand sets have an orange minute hand, for example. They're very squared off, very 70s in the way they've been approached. And when we see how the tritium has patinaed over time, the watch dial gives you the sort of feeling that you get when you look at a 1655 Explorer 2, which is a watch I've just discussed recently on this page. But what really makes this watch so unique, and what really distills that simplicity, is its form. Its form is so basic, it is so streamlined. The way the bracelet integrates with the case is seamless, and the whole language is followed through, and that is a very clear industrial design approach. It doesn't look like your typical watch design approach. It doesn't look traditional. It looks retro modern, and you can tell that someone had a blast just drawing out this idea on the page. Simplicity down to the last detail. You know, another important thing is the way texture has been handled on the piece. These pieces were titanium, if I'm not mistaken, and you can almost feel the texture of the titanium when you look at it. You look at the bezel and the way it has been cut. There is no hardness, there's no sharpness to the knurling around the bezel. You look at where the crown is set and the actual fitting of the crown. You can see the cuts around the crown almost follow suit with how the bezel has been knurled. All of these minute details add to the user experience, and it really does come back to communicating the whole industrial design nature that this piece is trying to follow. So what do I really appreciate just looking at it off the bat? I really enjoy the idea of the rounded forms. Everything feels sculptured, streamlined, easy to fit and to form around the wrist. It doesn't look like there are many breaks between the lines, so immediately you can see that the watch looks very integrated. It looks very purposeful in the way it's been created. I enjoy the idea that the crown has been offset and not left in the center. The idea behind offsetting the crown is that it doesn't get in the way of the wrist when you're flexing it, of course. If you wear watches on your left wrist, you would know that sometimes crowns can get in the way of the hand. So all these little ideas have been thought through. We move to the bezel and see that it doesn't have very aggressive knurling in the way it's been cut. It looks very purposeful and again follows the form of the bracelet. We look at the dial and the relationship between the batons and the plots, the simple minute track that integrates with all of the plots. It's very easy to understand, it's very easy to read, and that triangle at the 12 o'clock that's split down the middle centers your eye and makes the reading experience easier. We see a small red highlight on the second hand, and the fact that the hands themselves are white and contrast so heavily against the matte black dial again, just adds emphasis to the reading experience and makes it so much more legible. It's also very appreciated that the date window matches the color of the dial. Remember that these watches aren't exactly new, but the pedantic design person can see this and say, yes, this was considered. A lot of things were thought throughout this process. Now, of course, there were variants of these that were given to militaries, and they've been widely adopted over the years, particularly in Germany. But it is just fascinating to see how a design like this can stay almost timeless in the way it presents itself. It doesn't look like it's aged at all, and really has that modern feel around it. I would say it looks a lot more modern than most pieces we see nowadays. I have been singing the praises of this piece long enough. Now we're going to look at one of the details that is a problem, and they could have easily satisfied. In the beginning, if you remember, I said it's very hard to come to a point when you can say, have we reduced enough? Have we not over-reduced? And for the sake of this being a dive watch, the one area where they have over-reduced is the bezel function. The purpose of the bezel is to make the whole time-telling experience easier when it's being used. And of course, you can't exactly tell where the 5-minute, the 10-minute, 20-minute plots are on the bezel because nothing's there. That has been completely taken away. And it's an issue. It affects the whole dive watch persona. Of course, you have a broad arrow at the 12 o'clock, but you can't really tell where the 5 and where the 20 lines up, and it makes the reading experience, for that reason, difficult. So on one hand, the time telling is very easy, but the actual bezel reading, the dive timing reading, is difficult. And that's where there's this conflict, because this is a dive watch, and it's very important to emphasize the fact that this watch was based around the idea of being put in the ocean. So as a time-telling device, it's gorgeous, simple, easy. The form and the sculpturing and the way everything integrates, it is stunning. But the root characteristic of this watch being a dive watch, that's when it gets a bit bothersome. I hope now you can see how critical we designers are of each other's work. When you see an industrial designed product, you really try to analyze every little detail, and this piece is no different. I can tell immediately, without seeing Porsche Design on the dial, that this was made in an industrial design house, just because of how the figure of the watch has been thought through. But then I've also seen that they have gone a little bit too far with regards to reducing down some of the most important details of it, in fact, being a dive watch. What I think is so impactful about this piece and the time period when it was made and all of that is that we look at it now and we can see it is something different to all the other brands that are available nowadays. There was no thought about this watch having lugs that connected with a NATO strap. There was a lot of thinking that went into just how the bracelet would work and how it would flare, how it would fit the wrist, how it would then integrate with the head, how the dial would be simple, easy to read and to understand. Porsche Design have made some amazing pieces, and I hope to cover them in more detail in the future. But this watch, the Ocean 2000, as an example of 80s industrial design excellence, this is one serious contender.